Hey there. Welcome to First Look. Thanks for being here this week. Not much going on this week. Pretty low key. It's Monday of Holy Week, and I feel like I'm already in the deep end. I feel like I'm already swimming upstream. I think Monday might be of Holy Week might be one of I think the reason it feels like that is because everything that you have to do is in front of you. And I've already done I've checked off this box and this box and this box, and I still feel like, it still feels like that. It's interesting how that works. Even with all the prep and, this isn't my first rodeo. I've done this before. I have a feeling for how this should go, and I still feel like, I don't want to say I'm underwater, but it's a little overwhelming, and yet it's going to be okay. It's not nothing's going to melt. It's all going to be fine. Everything will come to pass as it needs to, and I'm looking forward to it. And by the end of it, by Sunday afternoon of Easter, I always feel really good. It's just the journey. Because I think it almost feels like, to me, all of the Lenten experience gets squished down into just a little bit of time. I don't know what it's like for you, but I think it's because you're anticipating things like Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday, and then so you're still kind of in that Lenten space, knowing that there's going to be this huge pivot to Sunday. But there's just all of this kind of mental gymnastics that goes on. And then there's just regular life, right? There's just, someone gets sick, and, school, and, other responsibilities you have in life, and whatever. It's just amazing how all of that kind of comes together. And for me, at least, I think it's just a much different experience than Christmas. So let's get into it, shall we? I had a thought as I was driving in about how I wanted to talk about this today. This is going to feel a little bit off the wall, but hopefully you'll get there with me. So just bear with this question for a second. So we have this practice in America that's usually done for exercise, and it's called yoga, right? You might be someone who does yoga, or you may have someone in your life who practices yoga. By and large, though, if someone says, "Hey, I'm going to go to my yoga class," or "I'm going to go to this," you can get them online. You can get them in, stream them in your home. Easy, right? Doing yoga isn't difficult, and sometimes the yoga class, depending on the kind that you have or whatever, might involve some mindfulness. A moment to kind of center yourself, or to try to block the world out, try to, gather yourself, gather your thoughts, clear your mind. And so it could add sort of a wholeness and wellness kind of experience. But it is in no way, shape, or form intended to be at least I think probably 99 times out of 100, at least the way we practice it in America, a religious experience, right? Nor is it trying to claim to be. Someone who teaches a yoga class is not doubling as a religious leader, even though we know that the practice of yoga is a religious practice in the Hindu tradition, right? It has very specific kinds of ways of practicing it. It's prayerful, it's mindful, but it's you know, it's a religious practice. And sometimes I feel like we took that, and I say we, I mean the West or the United States or something. We took that practice that is deeply religious and turned it into something that we use for a very different purpose. And I'm not trying to make that smaller. I think yoga is as a exercise, as a way of feeling more centered and more peaceful, is a wonderful practice. It's not religious. You know, you're not worshiping when you're practicing yoga, or you're not doing something worshipful, I could say. At least not in the context in which I have seen yoga practiced. It's done for, strength, wellness, and there's mindful practices involved. But my guess is that those who have taught the practice of yoga, especially in a religious context, probably did not intend for it to be something that I do simply for exercise, or simply for, to strengthen my body. And so in that way, I've always felt a little bit like, not that we shouldn't do it, but that we should call it something else. Like, we aren't doing what a religious leader is, I imagine, is teaching their people to do. We're not using it for that same reason that they're using it. Not that we're trying to make it strip it of its meaning, but I think we're applying different rules and meaning to it in a way that I think deserves more different language. We shouldn't be calling it that if it's not what we're doing. And the reason I bring that up, or the reason I mention that, is because I was thinking about how we understand all of the things that we do in Holy Week. And I started to think about and wonder about the way we practice those things, the rules we apply to them, what we decide to take away from them that we think of as important. In the same way that we might think about the true meaning of Christmas, the true meaning of Easter. I started to really think about how we contextualize the celebration of the resurrection. With crosses and pastels and the food that we eat, the things that we celebrate, eggs and rabbits and chocolates and all those kind of things, which are all good and fine, and that's I'm not complaining about that. But it made me also think about how are we taking the story of the resurrection, taking the story of Maundy Thursday, of Good Friday, and kind of making it what we need it to be. Are we getting at whatever the true lesson of that is? And I don't necessarily think that I can sit here and say that I know exactly what that should look like, but it made me wonder about it. Because anytime you have something that you're celebrating that goes thousands of miles away from its origin, a different language, a different worldview, a different understanding of how anything works, you lose something. You lose an original kind of thought, an original experience. And that's what I always have thought is such a shame. The further we get away from what actually happened, 2,000 years ago, the farther we get away from that, the further we get away from something that feels genuine or lived in. We were doing confirmation class yesterday, and we were talking about the Reformation. We were talking about John Calvin and why we're Presbyterian, and we, kind of talking through that with all the students. And so Calvin is everything that Calvin's doing, whether it comes to the sovereignty of God, talking about, that God is ultimately the one who has the plan and is the ruler and is the one who determines our salvation and is the source and author of everything. All those things you would hear me talk about on a Sunday. And how, even the way that we organize ourselves as Presbyterians, the fact that we don't have one central, leading head, but that we have sessions and we have presbyteries and we have outside bodies and inside we have ways of checking and balancing ourselves that are not centralized or aren't just one person. They're democratic. That we have this cloud of witnesses. All of that is really a rebuttal towards the world that Calvin lived in, one that nobility and kingship or social status that ruled the day. If you were the king, the Caesar, the queen, a monarch, if you owned all the land or whatever, that the centralized power that ignores the will of the people was a huge part of the context for which not only do we organize ourselves as a denomination, as religious people, but how we think about and talk about God. And that we can't ignore, that origin story. And it makes you wonder, would we think about God in those terms if it wasn't for the context in which Calvin wrote? One of the things we also talked about was the giving of alms, and how the church at the time, 500 years ago, was basically saying, well, you can seek forgiveness. God will forgive you if you give more and more money. The more you give, the more complete your forgiveness will be. That you can earn it in that way. Works, will earn it for you. God is one who punishes. God is one who the plague happened because you were bad, or this happened because you were bad. And Calvin comes along and says, no, God has claimed you from the beginning. Not because of something that you did or didn't do. And God, Calvin says that so that we can feel more free, not bound by the determinations of royalty or the determinations of a priest or a pastor, but that we can feel secure in who we are because of who God is. And that was supposed to be a freeing thing. Election or predestination, those things are supposed to free us from being under the scrutiny of fallible people. That's the whole idea. And you wonder if any of that would have transpired if it wasn't for the way that the people felt at the time. And I guess that's one of the things I hope that we start to try to explore during this Holy Week. As I thought, instead of reading the passages for you, that I would give you a few minutes with those three stories to try to think about how you might experience these things in a different way. So, starting with the Good Friday story, or I'm sorry, starting with the Maundy Thursday story. You have kind of two stories in one. In some years, we emphasize one over the other. So the first part of the story is really just the Good Supper, the Last Supper itself, and the covenant that's made there, the promise that we see there in the face of betrayal. Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. The institution of the sacrament. The promise of a covenant. And then knowing that all of that is going to happen in the face of an arrest. And so you have the arrest, you have the promise and the covenant and the service that happens. And then in the middle there, you have the second part of the story is Gethsemane. This moment of just emotional turmoil. And I got to thinking about I think a lot about the emotional turmoil of all of this. And being right on the edge of something changing. I think about Judas a lot. Almost every year you hear me talk about my perspective on Judas. And I think that he represents so much of who we are. Because I empathize with him more and more every year, I feel like. And when I say that I think he represents us, he represents you and I don't mean that in a because we're so evil kind of way, or in a way that would try to put you down or put me down. He does the unthinkable, which is betraying someone that he loved. But I think what we find is that what he loved more was the idea of maybe it was the power, maybe it was the freedom, maybe it was the chance to make something right. Judas wanted the world to be different, and maybe his own life to be different. He wanted it so badly that once he put together what was going to happen, it broke him. And he could see no other path than this one. And for as broken and awful as that is, and we know that he feels that way because he ends his life, it also represents, I think, a lot of the way that we understand the world. That when we want something so badly, either to keep something the same, to make something different, to make life happen the way that we feel like life should happen, the lengths that we are willing to go are sometimes limitless. And the ways that we can miss the forest for the trees for our own satisfaction I think is evident in the way that you and I navigate the world. And I think he is tortured in a way that I don't think often gets realized. I think this is a tortured person who, I look back on what happened before Holy Week, who Judas is. We don't really get an idea of who Judas is prior to Holy Week. Like, this is really the time where he kind of sort of comes to the forefront. Judas is just one of the 12. Before he's not in the inner circle. He's not Peter or John or James. He's the treasurer, but I mean, and he comes to the forefront. He's kind of a no-name character, really, until he does this. And you wonder, was there anyone who just wasn't willing to go as far as he did? Did anyone else think about it? Did it tug on anyone else? How close could Peter have been to making a similar decision? You think not, but I empathize more and more with him, because I feel like when you know how close you can be sometimes to making the wrong decision and making one that you can't come back from, that you start to sort of see how those decisions get made. And once he committed, maybe he didn't know how to get out, or he really believed, if I push him there, if I keep pushing, he will eventually just be the person I think he is. He was hoping against hope that Jesus would be who he thought Jesus was. And it just turns out that he was someone else. That he did miss the forest. But this is where he was. And it's amazing when I think about it, how much of life is really that struggle of trying to make something, make our lives, or make the world in what we want them to be. Or just kind of accepting them the way that they are without, as long as we are relatively safe, just kind of keeping them the way they are. That's sort of the other hand of that. But that we really don't know how to, or what to expect from God, what to expect from Jesus. Like, how do we really navigate that? Because I think what you're going to see in the resurrection, which I think we kind of, we like for about 15 minutes and then we very quickly move on, is when we get to Easter, the world should be different. It's like one more opportunity for us to say, Judas, this is how you went wrong. And it's not because you didn't believe in Jesus enough. It's that you didn't understand who Jesus was, or what this was for. That it would just, because, Peter and James, they missed the mark too. They didn't do what you did. And obviously what Judas did was worse. But I'm saying they all missed it, or they all wanted something else. Maybe they didn't miss it. Maybe that's just not what they wanted. Either way, they don't get there. And then they have to spend post-resurrection, the next 50 days or so, figuring it out. And the resurrection then becomes this, it feels overwhelming. because none of it should have happened. What happened to Jesus on Friday makes a heck of a lot more sense in the world than what Sunday means. Most of life is Good Friday. It ends in a way that's disappointing. Someone dies, and that's the end of the story. It's not heroic. It's just sad. Or something ends, and it just ends. Most of life is not triumph. It's learning how to deal with disappointment and hardship. It's the journey along the way. And so the shock of resurrection, I think, is the part that we miss because we've done it so many times. And I think that's my hope, is that somehow we can claim that in this season. We're not going to claim it all on Easter morning, but that we can claim it throughout the Easter season, that we can allow Easter to be the first day of something, of the next several weeks of really trying to get our minds around what resurrection means, how to experience it, how to actually experience it. I think that's the part for me, is that I should feel better because that's true. And I celebrate it every year so that I can claim a little bit more of that each and every year. So that's my hope, is that, much like, just to bring this full circle, is that we can practice this season the way that hopefully it was closer to what it was meant to be, where we still think introspectively about our participation in, the hardship that we see, and then also stand in awe of what resurrection means for us. So those are just thoughts of mine. It's a big week, and it comes with a lot of kind of big feelings and hopefully meaningful experiences. So just a reminder that Monday, Thursday, we'll be at Wexford. There's a dinner before at 6. The service is at 7. Good Friday is at Northmont, and it's at noon. Just come for the service, leave after the service. There's nothing happening other than that. So it's here in the sanctuary at noon. And then Easter will be on Easter. If you can sign up for breakfast, if you want to sign up for breakfast for Easter morning, that's being served by the Boy Scouts starting at like 8:45 in the morning. So if you want to, there's a form to fill out that we sent to you. But if you need it again, or you just want to call us, that's fine too. So, all right, I'm going to go do the next thing. So thanks for being you. I hope that you have a very meaningful Holy Week. Many blessings upon it. Thanks for everyone who made yesterday as wonderful as it was. And I'll see you next time for another First Look. Take care.